issues specific to women in the workplace, and I think these will be familiar to you. Okay, so is the poll question, the first poll question coming up, Davis? I had a question that I wanted you to think about. Okay, there it is, peak pay. So a man's peak pay occurs at what age, and a woman's peak pay occurs on average at what age? I would love for you to take a minute and enter your responses, and we'll come back to that in just a minute, okay? So equal treatment and pay. First of all, a couple of stories. This little girl is me. And when I was about that age, I told one of my elementary school teachers that I wanted to be the first female president of the United States. Even at a young age, I realized, hey, we haven't had one of those yet, and that might be a good thing to aspire to. I changed my mind. I decided I did not want to be the first female president of the United States. It looked like a harder job than I wanted to take on. Also, another story is that when I was in about the 6th grade, I remember we were a few select students from each of several grades were waiting in a room, and I was one of the older students, and the teacher left and I thought had put us in charge, and I must have had a little bossy streak and was advising some of the male students how they ought to behave. And one of them said to me, hey, I don't have to listen to you. You're a girl. And I remember it made me feel lesser than, like being a girl was some reason not to listen to what I had to share. A few years later, I worked at Baskin-Robbins, and it was my first lesson in pay disparity, because I had gotten offered a certain pay when I was hired to do my job. And then a young man that was hired after me was working with me on a shift one afternoon, and he said, hey, I'm only getting paid this much. What are you getting? And he was being paid more than me. And I had been working there longer. And I remember being very upset about that. And that was the beginning of my demise in working at Baskin-Robbins. I protested. And years later, as an adult, I would be director of institutional research, and I would actually report pay for both men and women. And in each step of the way, I, like probably a lot of you females who may be watching this webinar, felt a disparity of treatment and pay. Now, I've listed on the screen, issues of harassment, the Me Too movement, race and gender pay disparities. It occurs on a lot of levels, and it's not just men and women. It's based on race and ethnicity as well. And I know I reported in each of those categories in one past role that I had, one past job. And there were disparities in each of those categories. And interesting, this is a screen capture from payscale.com, where I was looking, for years I heard that the average pay for women was 77 cents on the dollar for a man. This says that in 2019, it was actually 81 cents for every dollar a man makes. And that's in an uncontrolled gender pay gap group. And then they say in a controlled gender pay gap, which controls for job title, years of experience, industry location, other compensable factors, has also decreased, but only by a penny since 2015. And then women in the controlled group make 98 cents for every dollar a man makes. And in that next paragraph, one of the lingering implications is what is lost over the course of a working lifetime. By calculating presumptive raises given over a 40-year career, we find that women in the uncontrolled group stand to lose $900,000 on average over a lifetime. Lost earnings narrow to $80,000 for the controlled group, but it's still significant, especially if you consider how lost earnings due to the gender pay gap would grow with compound interest if invested each year for 40 years. So it is significant. The references, the first slide was a screen capture, like I said, from payscale.com. The second one comes from a CNBC article titled, "Here's How Much Men and Women Earn at Every Age." So again, back to the poll question that I offered. Let's see what you said. So 13% of you thought late 30s for a man. Only 2% of you said early 40s. 22%. So most of you thought early 50s for a man was when the pay capped. And for a woman, mid 40s or late 30s. Interesting. So I'm going to close that. So it is late 30s for women, late 40s for men, which again is just really interesting. Why the difference? Let's see. And now, okay. So I wanted to share some information. So we've talked, we all know that there is a disparity in pay and often in treatment. And I want to move to talking about, so what are some things that we can do about that? How can we help fix that problem? Number one, we've never been in a better position to right the tilted ship. I'm excited about the future for young women and for myself. What can we do? Number one, educate yourself on median salaries. I always tell students in my business communication classes, you owe it to yourself to know what average pay is, what median pays are for the kinds of job that you want, for the years of experience that you have in the part of the country that you are working. You owe it to yourself to investigate what are those numbers. A lot of time what happens at the beginning of a career is that you get an offer for more money than you ever made in your life. It's not an hourly rate anymore. It's a salary, an annual salary. And it seems like a lot. And you think it's going to cover your bills and you're eager for the job and the opportunity and you say yes. And a lot of times women don't know that they can negotiate. Educate yourself. Know what the median salaries are. Advocate for a fair wage for yourself and for a fair wage for any other women hired if you are in a position of influence over that process. For those of us in education or mentoring in our organizations, help educate others, not just women, but men, to have fair practices. Because we need men that are empathetic to these disparities. One of my favorite books when I talk about HR matters like compensation in my classes is this book by Cy Wakeman, The Reality-Based Rules of the Workplace. And she says, your compensation should be based on the value you add, not the needs you have. So never go into a conversation asking for more pay by saying, hey, I'm getting married or I'm having children or the rent just went up or we're trying to buy a house. An employer is always going to compensate you based on the value that you bring in. So you've got to know how to leverage that information to give you the best opportunity for a pay raise or more responsibility, whatever it is that you're striving for. I love this formula by Cy. She says, your true worth to an organization is your current performance plus your future potential minus 3 times your emotional expensiveness. I always tell students you're hired on a promise. When you are going through the interview process, you've got to leverage not just the skills you currently have and the experiences that you do have under your belt thus far, but what you're capable of learning. I learn new computer programs quickly, or, I conquered this, that means I can conquer that. Know how to tell those stories. And then, what is emotional expensiveness? Well, some would say, and I think it's stereotypical and unfair, that women can be more emotionally expressive in the workplace. And emotional expensiveness is typically things like drama, heaviness, absenteeism, coming in late, having performance issues with the type of work that you have, or just letting personal things affect your ability to do the job, or internal drama. A lot of organizations will have policies against dating, for example, because they're trying to limit internal drama. So those are just a few things. Again, I think we teach people how to treat us. And the older I get, the more I realize that, and I want to educate other people to treat me fairly, and to treat me with respect. And so just remember that. We haven't talked a lot about the harassment issue. I don't have a lot of experience with harassment. I've not had that personally in my own life, but I know that it's a huge issue in the workplace. And to that, I would say, keep a CYA file. If you don't know what CYA stands for, it means cover your ass. And I think there's also great value in having mentors and people within your work spaces that guide you through tough moments and help navigate you through that process, and who can also be your advocate in rectifying that situation or helping to get you to a better situation. And then one last thing, and I hope that this doesn't sound stereotypical, maybe we'll get some feedback in the Q&A, but be mindful of your dress and behavior, and make sure that, so far as it depends on you, you are being professional. That is not to blame the victim and act like you asked for it. But it's been my experience, and perhaps it's been yours, that there have been times that maybe someone dressed in a way that put other people in an uncomfortable position and drew eyes and attention that might not have otherwise. And we do have a responsibility on our part to be as professional as we can in light of situations like that. So that concludes our discussion. Do you have any questions about fair treatment and pay that I can address? Let me see. What are some strategies you suggest for negotiating pay? Well, and I wish I could say that I was a great negotiator in this area, and I'm not necessarily, but I do feel a great responsibility to arm and educate women especially. And one thing that I recommend is asking. I tell young ladies, you have the right to negotiate. I think sometimes women don't realize that we do, and men seem to understand this more intuitively. So first of all, ask. If you feel that you're not being offered a fair compensation at the beginning of a negotiation, you can leverage things like, if I come for this pay right now, might we re-talk about it in 6 months or a year from now? What would be the performance markers that I would need to hit in order to get to the next level? There's a fine line sometimes at the beginning, getting your foot in the door with an organization. Maybe you wait until you've been there a year, but at that point, if you have a good relationship with your manager during performance evaluations, that's a natural time to talk about where you are currently, where you'd like to be, what is a realistic expectation of the time that you can be there, and how can you both together strategize to bring more value to the company and to help increase your compensation. Rebecca says, how do you know your own worth in the workplace? I know women tend to undersell themselves. How do we avoid this? That's great, Rebecca. And hello, by the way. I'm so glad you're on here. I miss you. That's going to be one of the other points that we talk about. We do tend to undersell ourselves. A lot of times we think that we have to have something like 80% of the qualifications to actually apply for a job. And historically, men don't feel that they have to have 80% of the qualifications to be allowed to apply for that job or to stretch for that opportunity. So I think you gain a sense of your value to the organization if you keep track of things. I always recommend that people keep a portfolio of their achievements, because for that annual conversation that is so critical after you are hired, where you talk about your performance evaluation, you should be keeping up with your successes, your failures, the projects that you've worked on, any emails or things that people have sent you saying, wow, Rebecca is a great team player. She was critical to our success on this particular project. You can do that for others, even from a really young age. I remember one time a recent graduate, a young man, sent a letter to the dean of the college saying that I had been a good teacher, and it meant the world to me. I didn't ask him to do that. And he intuitively understood at a pretty young age that he had the power to do that for someone. That's leadership thinking. And, when the dean told me about it, I went to him and I thanked the former student. And, what would I not do to help his career now? He's done me such a service. So I think we can be strategic, not for the sake of just, how can I get ahead? But the more we help other people and just step into the role of leadership thinking, it's going to come. And part of that is keeping track of what you do in a portfolio, whether you're required to keep one for work or not. It's a great, tangible, concrete way to come into that conversation and say, well, here were my goals. Here's what I hit. Here's where I fell short. Here's what I think I need to do to correct it, and go forward from there. So, but you start to learn, again, mentors can help you understand your own worth to an organization as well. But keeping track of numbers and growth is great. How can you find out if there's a disparity between men and women's pay in your organization? Can you ask HR without being seen as looking for trouble? It is dicey. I'm going to be honest, it's dicey, and you're really not supposed to talk to your coworkers. That Baskin-Robbins fellow employee should never have told me what he was making and asked me what I was making, because it does breed resentment. Every new employee that comes in with their own set of bargaining power. The best thing I know to liken it to is we knew a really talented young man several years ago who was a fantastic baseball player. And he did not get picked up when I don't even know how it works. I don't even know the language to say, but he didn't get to play for the minor or the major leagues as it was hoped that he would be able to. And part of that was because he was a catcher and there were only so many catcher positions available. As an author, pitching a book to a publisher, sometimes they have so many openings in their catalog for the year. They're looking for historicals, and I've written suspense. And it's not that my idea isn't good or my book isn't good, but it wasn't what they wanted on their slate at that moment. And so sometimes in the workplace, depending on their hunger and their need and your leverage that you bring to that conversation, that's how there's a lot of different discrepancies in pay. And sometimes it has to do with what you were paid before, and it just compounds and builds. So I would recommend that you don't just ask people outright, but you can go to sources like payscale.com and you can work through that and enter all the information for you, and it will tell you what the average pay is for this kind of job, for this much experience in this part of the country. So I hope that's helpful. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Let's see. Let's move on to issue number 2, work-life balance. Oh my, work-life balance is so hard. Do we have a poll question here, Davis? So why is work-life balance such an issue for women? Check all that apply. I'm going to let you sit with that and we'll come back to it. Don't let me forget to come back to it before we get to the end. Okay, work-life balance. This is, I'll explain a lot of these pictures that I used as background pictures today are from our youngest daughter's wedding. And this is a shot of her surrounded by her bridesmaids. And I thought it represented well, here are young, talented women who are about to go out there into the workplace, and my heart goes out to them. It only took a pandemic for flex models to emerge, bringing new challenges. So work-life balance, if you ask most women, it's going to be on a top 3, I think, issues for them, how to balance those things. And I'll go ahead and confess, if you're working on that poll, I'd be surprised if you don't say all of those things, because I would check all of those things. The need to prove myself, the need to appear competent and perfect. that women are the primary caretakers of children and or aging parents. Women perform more home cleaning, cooking, and supply stocking in the home. Women highly value relationships, and they have trouble saying no. These are all issues specific to women. And it looks like you agreed. Yeah, I appreciate your response. Thank you. Yeah, the need to prove yourself. Hard to say no. Why is it so hard to say no? We'll talk about that. I certainly don't have all the answers where work-life balance is concerned. The challenge of technology, we're on 24/7. Our jobs have followed us. To me, during the pandemic, it's work has really encroached on home. If you did have the capability to keep those things separated in the past, I know I worked really hard to try to keep my professor job on campus and my writer job and all the other that I do at home. And during this pandemic, that just hasn't been possible. I remember how hard it was when my girls were young and I was working from home and they were underfoot. So let me say a few things. Work-life balance truly is an illusion. We don't need to chase our tails. It's not something that we can actually probably ever achieve. And now we're perfectly balanced and aligned, and we're going to stay that way, like the wheels on our cars. Work-life balance means something different to everyone. That's also why it's hard to achieve. For me, personally, work-life balance is about my peace level. Am I at peace with what I'm able to give and accomplish in each of the categories where I am giving and accomplishing? That's the real question in my mind. Marriages and partnerships are rarely 50-50 when it comes to all those tasks at home. It's an 80-20 today, it's a 40-60 tomorrow, it's a 30-70 the day after that. And it's always counterbalancing, I think. We gravitate toward the jobs we're best at. My husband and I were talking about me doing this webinar, and he said, man, if I had to cook, we'd be hungry. And it's true. I was in Italy when the pandemic started, and he was here. And when I got home, the cupboards were bare because that is just not his giftedness. So part of that I do think is that we gravitate or we take on what we have to. But yeah, it's just hard. I think, let me go to this next slide. I think here it's really important to know what your needs are. You've got to have honest conversations with the other people who share the load with you when it comes to outside work, when it comes to home and life balance. Several years ago, I took a performance index through an organization in town that was free and available to me. I looked at it as an assessment type for students, and the first page, it was only 2 pages. It's pretty quick. The first page was about 50 different descriptions, and it said at the top, check everything that you feel describes you, that you truly are. Creative, thoughtful, gratitude. It was a description of about 50 different qualities, and you check all that apply. And then you go to the next page, and it's the same 50 qualities. And now you're challenged by checking all that you feel that you must be at work. And the point of it was that the greater the gap between who you really are and who you think you have to be, the more it's costing you. You have a finite amount of energy, and you've got to learn to respect that. What can we do about it? 2 things that I think have been the most beneficial for me personally. I love to read books. How can I be better? How can I make myself better? And 2 of my favorites are Essentialism and 1,000 Gifts. So practicing the art of saying no and knowing what I need to focus on the most, because I want to make my highest contribution in the most important areas and not be distracted chasing my tail. And then 1000 Gifts is a book that talks about the art of gratitude and how there is a strong link between gratitude and joy. And I just love it. It's by Ann Voskamp. She has a blog and beautiful pictures and photos in that. And then Greg McEwen is from the UK, and there's all kinds of resources out there from these two folks. So let's take the pulse for a minute. Let's see what you're saying in the question and answer. Hello, Hannah. If you're in a workplace that doesn't currently have performance reviews, how do you balance requesting more investment from your management with not being emotionally expensive? Okay, yes, that's a great question. And again, I would say just ask if you, whoever you have your performance evaluation with, ask if you can have a meeting with them, prepare for that meeting, make it easy on them, let them know what the agenda is. I would like to talk about having regular performance evaluations. Sometimes with small companies and startup companies, I know you were an entrepreneur major, sometimes smaller companies may not have a regular process of doing this. And if you crave it and you want it and you want the opportunity to talk about how to get to the next level, just ask for it. Mentors can help you prepare for conversations like that. Again, I'm a big fan of mentoring. And then just, I think being really open. Being open is not being confrontational. They're not the same thing. So I think you can have an open conversation and express your need without it coming across like you're being combative. What can we do to combat the implicit bias towards women when it comes to competing with men for higher level positions? We know men are often chosen because they seem more dedicated to their careers due to a lighter workload at home. This is true. Again, I think, you know, I knew when I was asked to talk about this topic, it's going to be tough because I don't have all the answers. I've tried to research what really are the most common issues that we all face, and then what can we do about it? And I think things are moving in a positive, good direction, but we're not there yet. One survey that I read, one article that I read said that it might be 2059 before, was it 39 or 59, that we, before we actually get to equal pay in the workplace. And that's discouraging. And I hope that recent events maybe will make that a little quicker. I don't know if that's how it will actually play out, but to combat implicit bias towards women who do come across as competitive, it's actually one of the points that we're about to talk about. So I think we will come back to this for those higher level positions. There aren't as many women as we'd like in those positions. And yeah, we'll come back to this. Ask me this again at the end if we didn't touch on it enough to satisfy. But I know that is a risk that we face, is that men seem more willing and available to take that risk. They seem like they've got more time and opportunity to take those risks sometimes. Okay, so let's look at this next one, confidence. It's tied to what I think you're asking. We've got a poll question here. Have you ever hesitated to volunteer, speak up, or be confrontational in a work meeting, and why? Afraid of being wrong? Didn't wish to draw attention to yourself? Didn't want people to think you were overbearing or a know-it-all? I didn't want to use the B word. I've already said the word ASS, sorry. Yeah, so let's sit with that poll question for a minute and we'll come back to it. So confidence, why is confidence so hard? So I want to start by talking about the pie, and I want to tell 2 stories about women named Joe. So number 1, the pie. Why are we so afraid to admit that we love dessert? I knew a woman named Jo Norton, and she actually passed away a couple of years ago, but she was the only woman I ever knew who was unapologetic about loving dessert. And she was such a fireball. And I remember that made a huge impression on me. She's like, I love dessert. And sometimes she would eat her dessert first. And I love that she felt confident enough to do that. I feel like the more common thing is for most of us to act like, oh no, I really don't eat sweets. That's not a temptation for me. Or we think that it shouldn't be. Why is that? Why? The second story about Jo, you see the little girl in the frame behind her who's wearing that Tinkerbell costume. I don't know if you can tell that's what it is, but I know that's what it is because that is our oldest daughter, Jo. And she saved her money, went to the Disney store and bought a Tinkerbell costume. She brought it home, put it on, got her pixie dust ready, went out in the backyard and told us goodbye because she was confident that it was going to work and she was about to take off. And I look back on that moment and I think, oh, I wanted her feet to come off the ground so much. I did not want her confidence in that happening to be dashed. So confidence, inferiority complex. Have you ever struggled with it? Do you have worthiness issues? Why is that? Why do we struggle with that so much? Okay, afraid of being wrong, don't want to draw attention to yourself, and don't want people to think you're overbearing. Yeah, me too. I would have had to check all of those. We'll come back to questions if you have them. Write those down on this matter. You've probably heard by now that Sheryl Sandberg said that part of the responsibility is on us to lean in, to come to the table. We cannot go into work meetings and hold back because we're afraid of rocking the boat. I do think that culturally men are raised to view rocking the boat as a good thing. A linguist by the name of Deborah Tannen says that at a very deep level, this is a screen capture from my website where I talk a little about gender differences and communication differences especially, but they're taught to rock the boat. They're taught to compete because Deborah says at a very deep level, they value status and power. Women, on the other hand, typically value relationship. So when it comes to a moment like this, when we're in a work meeting and we're all around the table, it's viewed as a positive for a man to speak up, to even be a little bit argumentative, because he's just exerting the power that he brings to the moment and it possibly increasing his status in the eyes of the group. A woman has more at stake in that moment because if she speaks up and she's viewed as combative, that is a negative thing culturally. And we don't want to be seen that way. We don't want to be seen as bossy. I even said earlier that I was bossy in that moment when I was in 6th grade and I told the boy what to do and he said he didn't have to listen to me because I'm a girl. And a lot of people would say, we need to get rid of the word bossy when it comes to women. It's not being bossy, it's showing leadership. We need to start speaking that language. We need to start buying into that. We don't have to be angry or defensive when we ask for things, but stop telling yourself defeating and untrue things. Stop making assumptions that may very well be false. And there's a concept that I talk about sometimes in servant leadership called practicing curiosity over condemnation. So let's say that somebody's rude to you. Another woman treats you a little bit rudely on the sidewalk one day at work, and you come into the office and man, you take it personally and you think that she thinks certain things about you that may or may not be true because that's not what she said. What if you instead practiced curiosity over condemnation? What if you said, wow, I wonder what's going on with her. She didn't seem herself today. I hope everything's okay. She must have a lot on her mind. I think if we could deflect a little bit more. Brene Brown, you're probably familiar with Brene Brown. She has written 13 books. I ended up putting my books below the row of Brene's books because I just thought they all looked so much So I thought they all looked good together. And it was I kind of had to stretch to add my books to the page because I'm reluctant to talk about the fact that I've written a few books. I write fiction, she writes nonfiction. And the point there being when I did that row and I had some space at the bottom and I thought, what else could I put there? And it's like, oh, the background, it was looked really nice with my books. But I resisted that at the beginning because I've been taught, like, don't self-promote. And it's the hardest thing in the world when you're an author because you have to self-promote. Back to Brene, she's been so good for me. In The Gifts of Imperfection, she talks about the dangers of perfectionism. She talks a lot about comparison. She talks about being brave and reaching for courage. And those are things that I need. I think she's been such a phenomenon with her message because we've needed her message. And I think most people have really appreciated some of the new information that she's put out and the new charges to women to rise strong and to dare greatly and to dare to lead and all of those things. And so I just wanted to thank Brene Brown on this webinar for all that she's taught me. She tells a story in one of her podcasts, and I think in one of her books, about when a teacher told her daughter, "You're a mess." And the daughter said, "I may be making a mess, but I'm not a mess." We need to have more conversations like that with ourselves. I think it's too tempting. We have a tendency to compare as women and to always think that we are coming up on the short end when we compare ourselves to someone else. And the truth is, and that's a statement that I have started using in my own mind, when I am tempted to think less of myself, I try to come back and say, no, Leanne, the truth is, you're a writer too. The truth is, she may not think that about me. The truth is, she could be having a bad day. And I challenge you to do the same. Start conversations in your own head with that phrase, the truth is. What is the truth? Do you know the truth? Brene has helped my husband and myself in our marriage because sometimes when we have a misunderstanding, I will say to him, the story I'm telling myself right now is that you're mad at me. The story I'm telling myself is that you blame me because supper's not on the table and you're hungry and you've just gotten home. The story I'm telling myself, this is a way for me to be honest with my husband about how I'm feeling right now and what the false assumption I might be making. And I need him to help me with it and to clarify on that point. Don't label yourself as a loser. Don't label yourself as a failure. Don't label yourself as lesser than in any way. And don't do that to other people. Don't do that to other women and assume that they intend you harm or malice when maybe they don't. And if you have a problem with someone, even, back to Hannah's question about a manager, what do you do if you're in a situation where you haven't had a performance evaluation yet? Go and ask for it. And if they seem reluctant or whatever, maybe try that. The story I'm telling myself is that, I don't know, what I started to say, I decided to bring it back. I didn't like it. I think you just have to be honest with people and say, here is what I would like to do and what I would like to achieve. Tell me, would that mesh well here? Would that work well? Because if an organization is not having performance evaluations, you don't want to come across like you're instructing them if you're the younger junior person in the scenario, like you're instructing them on how to do it. But I think it's very fair to say, I long for one. I would love to personally have a performance evaluation. I wonder, have you guys done that in the past? And might we develop a process? I'd even be willing to work on that if you wanted me to develop a process for annual performance evaluations. And here's why I think that would be a good idea. Anytime you come bringing information armed with solutions, not just laying the problems out there. Emotional expensiveness is you bring me a lot of problems, but you never bring me solutions. If you come with a viable idea about how to make things better, I think good organizations would appreciate that. So last point on this, if we thought and talked as kindly to ourselves as we did to others, I think we'd all be okay. Last year I was at a conference, an ABC conference in Miami, and I confessed in that conference that when I first developed my website, I was afraid of telling anybody about it. I was afraid I would get criticized for it. And it seems kind of silly to even say now, but a gentleman in the audience raised his hand and he said, "Have you ever been criticized for it?" And I thought, no. Never. The thing I feared never happened. And that often is the case. So let's see how we're doing on our question and answer. Okay. How do women in management positions deal with being in a position of authority without having employees thinking she's being abrasive or over aggressive and emotional? Oh, that's a great question. I think this is going to come up. I feel like I keep saying this is going to come up in my next point. Perfect segue. But I do feel that this is about to come up in my next point, the fifth point, not the fourth point. And so I'll try to come back to it there. How are we doing on time? Ooh, 12:46. Okay. So Cassandra, I hear you. And I'm not going to forget about this. Let's come back to this. Okay, number 4, limited opportunities and role models. So this is a screen capture of some stats that talk about how low the numbers are in Fortune 500 companies of female CEOs and on boards. And yep, and I won't stay there a long time. I've talked a lot about mentoring, and in the point I want to make about the low numbers is that if we crave to understand how the game is played, how are we going to do that if we don't have a whole lot of role models available to us? We have more women at the lower levels hungry to learn these things than we have older and experienced women to help them along the way. So that leads us to conversations about mentoring. And I've taught a special topics course on this in the past, and I feel really passionate about this. It's a process for the informal transmission of knowledge, social capital, and psychosocial support perceived by the recipient as relevant to work, career, or professional development. And it can go broader than that. Mentors don't have to just be about work. A few years ago, a young man approached my husband and said, "Would you be a spiritual mentor to me? There's something in you that I admire, and I would like to get to know you better. I would like to learn from you." So mentoring is a relationship, whether you're, I think I missed the poll on this, Davis, if we can put that question up. Yeah, so who actually receives more mentoring on average? And I had said, like, in official mentoring programs, do men or women actually get mentored more? I'd love to know what you think about that. I think I was about to give the answer away. So we'll come right back to it when people have had time. Feel free to put it up there, Davis. So mentoring can happen in official programs. There are a lot of peer mentoring programs that are about onboarding. There are succession planning mentoring programs that are about curating and cultivating strong talent within the organization. And mentoring is just a fantastic concept. It's an old concept. So you do say men, and the truth is that women actually get mentored more in official programs than men do, but men overwhelmingly get sponsored more. So we'll talk about what is the difference between mentorship and sponsorship, because it can be critical. Mentoring is about the transmission of wisdom. It's the transfer of truth, according to Reggie Campbell, who wrote a book called Mentor Like Jesus. And I love that description of it. They help us look forward to our future and backward at our accomplishment. It's about relationship. Mentoring is intentional. If you want to build mentoring relationships, do it on purpose, and start by saying, like an intentional sculptor, start by saying, here's why I want a mentor. I want to learn how to ask the hard questions. I want to be seen as a leader without being seen as a dictator, or queen bee. We'll talk about it in number 5. I want to be viewed favorably if possible, but I also want to be taken seriously. And how do I do that? And so it's about having conversations with maybe some men in your life who can help to give you insights, you know, what women have been able to balance this well, and why was that? What were their characteristics? Have women in your life that you feel like have navigated that particularly well, and ask them questions. You might even approach somebody who does a really bad job of that and try to decipher why that is. And, you know, what are this person's good characteristics? Do I have similarities to this person? And how is this person viewed? And if I want to be viewed differently, then I need to do some investigative work there. And I need to figure out, you know, what is it that I need to change if I want to be viewed differently than that. So that's what I'm talking about when I say be really intentional about the relationships that you form. Don't be afraid to reach out. A mentor or a mentee can reach out and ask for a mentoring relationship. And if you build an on-purpose mentoring relationship with someone, you stand to gain a lot of wisdom, a lot of insights, political insights, things like that. You can also follow thought leaders. I had written down earlier a couple of tips I got from a woman named Margaret Morford, who heads a company called HR Edge in Brentwood that have worked with a lot of high-profile people and organizations. And I remember hearing her speak, and she's just a phenomenal speaker if you ever get a chance to hear her. But I remember her saying, you can't drink water and cry at the same time. So if you ever find yourself in a situation where you're worried you might come across as emotional, you might tear up, take water with you, have something to drink on the ready so that you can't get emotional. Just take a drink. I've been in meetings where I was like, ooh, man, I was really thirsty. Try not to cry. And another thing that she mentioned is if you ever have a disagreement with somebody, I thought this was brilliant advice. Let's say that you have a disagreement with John at work. Before John can go to y'all's supervisor, y'all being Southern, you go to the supervisor first and you say, here's what happened. John and I had a disagreement, and here's my viewpoint, and I just wanted to make you aware of it. And that way, if John goes and paints you badly, then John looks bad, not you. But you've got to be truthful. You know, don't inflate it. Don't make it more than it is. Just state the facts. And she throws out a lot of really good little tips like that for how can let's see if I had written another one. Oh, choose your confidants wisely. That was another tip that she gave, because sometimes women, because we're so relational, we may share information with the other women at the office that's of a nature that would maybe put us at a disadvantage if that were known later when they're looking for leaders. And so just be really careful and make sure it's somebody who protects that information for you. Okay. So I know our time's about to get away from us, and I do want to talk about this last one: support for one another. And yeah, so here's our question. Have you ever heard of a disagreement between two women as a cat fight? Have you ever heard of a disagreement between two men as a cat fight or a dog fight or anything other than a disagreement? So I'll give you just a second on that. Have you ever heard the term queen bee syndrome? That's actually a term I only heard recently, like in the last couple of years, queen bee syndrome. And one article that I read by The Atlantic compared queen bee syndrome to the righteous woman and suggested that women who embrace culturally feminine traits are typically seen as the righteous woman. She's very helpful. She reaches a hand down and back and up and sideways. You know, she's kind, she's nurturing, she's approachable, she's helpful. The righteous woman. And then The opposing type of woman is the queen bee, who is authoritative, a little bit dictatorial, and not as helpful and maybe willing to reach a hand down or back to help people coming along, because it's almost as if they say, hey, I had to fight for my place, you have to fight for yours. And they seem unwilling to help one another. Yeah, so 100% on this. Why is it called a cat fight? And why, the implication is that, ooh, drama. When you talk about something like a cat fight, the implication is that when women argue in the workplace, that it's going to be long and drawn out, that there's going to be vindictiveness, that's the word I'm trying to say, that it's going to be dramatic. And yet men can have a healthy disagreement and it's considered healthy. And it's not long and drawn out. So why is that? What can we do as women for our part in that? Again, women who tend to have these female traits are viewed more favorably, and it can be a very disfavorable picture of someone if they don't embrace those virtues naturally. And I think that's quite unfair. And I'm sure that in the past, I myself have been in moments where I felt like a female was being particularly harsh in a moment. And, the only thing I can really do in that situation is control myself. And I know that for myself, I'm a big advocate that women should help other women. I think men should help other women. I didn't say this on the mentorship section, but were it not for men willing to mentor women and help them understand the particular challenges of navigating their worlds where they typically dominate, we wouldn't have made the strides that we have. We depend on men who have favorable impressions of women, who admire strong mothers and wives and daughters, who have been willing to mentor women in the past. And I think the same is certainly true for women. I think women should mentor men. I think women should mentor other women. But certainly, I think we should support one another when we have the opportunity to do so, and to not hold back from that thinking, well, I had to work really hard to get what I've got. She's going to have to work hard for what she gets. It is dangerous, like I said before, to play the comparison game. Have you ever heard anybody say, she's so perfect, she's so beautiful, her home is so nice, she's so slim, she's so together, I hate her? Have you ever heard a woman say that? I hate that statement. I wish no woman would ever utter such a thing, because to me, that's all about comparison. And it's this striving for perfection, wanting it for ourselves, and trying to, I don't know, maybe feeling better in some way if we put someone else down because they seem to have attained something good in their lives. Let's not do that anymore. Let that never be said of you. Applaud and cheer the women around you. Sometimes as an author, I think that my opportunities are limited. If somebody else has a bestseller, then, there's less room for me. But why? Why do we think that way? Why do we not think that there's enough pie for everybody at the table, right? It's not a zero-sum proposition for one person to do well. That means that we're not going to have good things that come to us also. So, and this quote from Melville, we cannot live for ourselves alone. Our lives are connected by 1,000 invisible threads, and along these sympathetic fibers, our actions run as causes and return to us as results. And then a lot of people have gone farther than they thought they could because someone else thought they could. And the greatest good you can do for another is not just share your riches, but reveal to him or her his or her own riches. So, do we have any final parting questions? Do you think showing emotions to others makes you weak? No, I do not. I think sometimes culturally that has been the presumption in the past. I met someone recently walking in my neighborhood who used to be a producer at Channel 4, and we were talking about a newscaster that was there in the 80s when I was coming of age that I really admired. And I remember when she left Channel 4, she cried on air. And that was considered pretty revolutionary at the time. I also watched a master class with Robin Roberts, who got emotional when she told about her cancer and her struggle with cancer. And, you know, historically, I've been told, I don't know if you've been told, never cry at work. Don't show emotions like that at work, because that's the risk you take, is being perceived as weak. I actually saw those moments as beautiful. Again, I think Brene Brown is helping to change our perception of that vulnerability is not weakness, that vulnerability is actually strength. And I think people are starting to understand that and have different opinions about the fact that we are emotional beings, and it's okay to be. But there is a fine line, and you are trying to manage impressions of others. Oh, thank you, Suzanne. That's so kind. How do you suggest proceeding with women in the workplace who criticize and label other women for showing emotions at work? Oh, good one. And how do we change the label? I think it starts with us, you know. One man can change the world is what I always think of. There was a t-shirt years ago that I saw, and it's, you know, like the handprints of Christ. And it's just so powerful to think, you know, it starts with me. It starts with me. We all have the opportunity to be influential in our spaces, and, you know, do everything that you can. And if you find yourself at an organization or in a culture that is toxic and people are not supportive of one another, where there are subversive issues of harassment or disparities, I would get my resume in order and look for a company that was better in line with my own values and aspirations. And if you are in a position to hire and to really lead and manage in your organization, bring good people in. You know, take your time, vet that process, and bring great people to your organization who will help create that culture for everyone. That's the only way I know to do it. Okay. Any other parting comments? I know we're right on there, 102. It has been my pleasure and delight to be with you today. And I hope we've talked about something that is beneficial to you. If you ever want to go to my website, it's listed there. And then that's my email address at Lipscomb. If anybody wants to follow up privately with any conversations, I would be glad to address those. I think I see one more question. This has been fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. Sears, L-Y. Is that Laura Sears? I bet that's Laura Sears. I hope so. Well, if so, then we are friends already. Yes. All right. Well, it's been my pleasure, and I wish all of you well, and yeah, let's all cultivate the twin spirits of gratitude and generosity in our own spaces. Have a wonderful rest of your day.